Okay, so we're gonna start a little bit of a chat. Uh, One time it happened that Buddha was holding his evening talk, and he brought a silk handkerchief. And normally he would never bring anything, but this time he did. So he had some purpose. And while he was waiting, he turned the silk handkerchief into multiple knots. And he asked one of his disciple, he says, "Can you remove these knots for me?" And he really had made them pretty tight knots. He tried, but he really was not successful. So he says, "How do I remove these knots then? And where did the knots come from?" So the disciple says they were part of the silk handkerchief. It's not that knot came from outside and settled on the silk handkerchief. The silk handkerchief itself was used to create the knots. So the silk handkerchief had two forms. One, unknotted, plain, as it was brought in, and another, knotted, the one with the knots. So the knotted handkerchief still had the nature of silk handkerchief. It was still a handkerchief, but it was knotted. And so Buddha saw the frustration of the disciple. So he asked the disciple, "What should I do?" He says, "Buddha, you are the one who created these complex knots. Only you can remove." He says, "How can I remove?" He says, "Because you used whatever method you used to create those knots, you just have to go back, replay it, go back, and you can remove it. We can't because we didn't know. We don't know what techniques used." So Buddha used this example in describing our mental state. Our mind is knotted, but the knots don't come from outside. The knots are created within our mind. Our mind itself finds its ways of making the life complicated. Somebody gets angry at you, you have to respond. Who says so? Your mind says so. So now you respond, and then you get another response in the back. And then it keeps staying in your mind. He said this, and she said this, and I said this, and that. And a knot is created against that particular person. The better thing would have been not to create the knot and let it go. A lot of times we know all these things, but do not happen. So the problem that comes in that we are prone to create the knots. But knots are in our own mind and created by us also. So the solution has to come from us. No one else can do it for you. Not even Buddha. If he comes in, he can remove your knots because your knots are your knots. And the thing is that it's very beautiful how he took the example of a handkerchief because it's a fabric, a type of fabric. And if you realize that Einstein had to say the same thing, space and time is one fabric, one that creates these knots. And this fabric has been utilized in a day-to-day life. We use the time and space to have different events. So the events utilize the fabric of space and time. But what Einstein could not figure out was something that is beyond is also a fabric of consciousness. And a consciousness in a very ultimate state is very peaceful, very calm. But because we modify it with our vrittis and vasanas and likes and desires and hatreds and greeds, we keep on tying the knots on them. And then we're suffering. Then we want a solution. We cannot find the solution. And then we say, what do we do? And we ask Dharma Guru's help, go to the temples, pray to God, do this for me, do that for me. Jain says that take us into the moksha, as if Mahavir has nothing else to do. Mahavir himself went to moksha on his own. No one can do it for you. So remember this. Our mind is nothing but a modified fabric, a fabric of consciousness. So when you ultimately become successful in unwinding these knots, you turn into unknotted silk handkerchief. Nice, smooth, soft, enjoyable, full of peace, full of calm. The handkerchief of consciousness. How to remove it? The path is meditation. Your knot needs to be observed. You are the one who created the knots. So obviously you will figure it out. And the only way to figure it out is through the beam, through the light of consciousness onto these knots that is making you suffer. You may have multiple knots, but fine, no problem. The consciousness has all the time in the world. But that's why this contemplative meditation comes in handy. And in this contemplative meditation, you select a single problem that's making you suffer and apply the full state of awareness to it and be ready to find that it was your own fault. And suggestion will come from within that, yes, it was my fault and maybe I should have done that. And this solution itself will come from within. No one can do it for you, no matter how many words I use. That, okay, your anger is a problem, this and that, you do this. No, nothing will work until you accept that anger is my creation and only I can remove this anger. You can, but not at the mind level. You cannot remove it because mind will only decide that, okay, you have an anger, you need to be nice to people, this and that. No, that's one part of the mind gets subdued temporarily. The other part starts becoming wise. Oh, yeah, no problem. You can connect, you can do this, you can do that. But the other part is going to stay hidden with the full-fledged anger, and the situation comes in, it will come out. So this is how the mind works. So never think that mind itself, by committing itself to not doing anger, is going to solve the problem. It's not going to solve the problem. The only way you experience the divine peace within. When you experience the heavenly existence within, and for that meditation is an absolute must, the anger starts dissipating because you realize the foolishness of being angry, meaninglessness, futility of an anger. Then it starts falling away little by little. So this much to learn from the Buddha's handkerchief. Hopefully this will open up a lot of your knots, my knots, your knots. So much for today. Thank you, guys.